I'll never forget the smell of the roasted duck that night. It's funny, isn't it, how your brain latches onto the strangest details when your world is falling apart. The duck had been roasting for hours, filling our brownstone with the rich, savory aroma of orange glaze and herbs. I'd spent the entire day preparing for this dinner. My hands had been busy chopping vegetables, setting the table with our finest china, arranging fresh flowers in the crystal vases Richard's mother had given us as a wedding gift. I'd wanted everything to be perfect. Perfect? That word haunted me. I'd spent 3 years chasing perfection, and that night, I finally understood that I'd been living inside a perfectly constructed lie. The dining room glowed with soft candlelight. I'd chosen cream-colored candles, the expensive ones that don't drip, placing them in the silver candelabras down the center of our long mahogany table. The table could seat 12 comfortably, though we rarely had large gatherings. Richard preferred intimate dinners, he always said. Private affairs. Now I know why. I was wearing a navy blue dress, fitted at the waist, elegant but not too formal. I'd spent an hour on my hair and makeup. When Richard had told me 3 days earlier that we were having a special family dinner, that there were some people he wanted me to meet, I'd actually been excited. Nervous, yes, but excited. In 3 years of marriage, Richard had kept his family life remarkably separate from ours. His mother, Alina, visited occasionally, always announced, always brief. But other relatives, friends from his past, he always had excuses for why I hadn't met them. They lived abroad. They were private. They wouldn't understand our lifestyle. I thought this dinner meant something was changing, that he was finally opening up, letting me deeper into his life. I'd imagined cousins, perhaps an aunt or uncle, maybe old family friends. I'd prepared myself to be charming, to make a good impression, to finally feel like I truly belonged in the Thornton family. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Richard was upstairs in his study, on a phone call as usual. "Can you get that, darling?" he called down. His voice was smooth, casual, giving away nothing. I checked my reflection one last time in the hallway mirror, smoothed down my dress, put on my warmest smile, and opened the door. The woman standing on my doorstep was stunning. That was my first thought, and I hated myself for it immediately. She was around my age, maybe a year or two older, with dark hair swept up in an effortless chignon that probably took her 15 minutes, but looked like she just twisted it up without thinking. She wore a charcoal gray dress that screamed expensive, even though it had no visible labels. Her jewelry was understated but clearly real, pearls at her ears and throat. And her eyes, when they met mine, held something I couldn't quite read. Not hostility exactly, something sadder, something like recognition or perhaps sympathy. Behind her stood 2 teenagers. The boy was tall, maybe 16 or 17, with Richard's jawline and Richard's eyes. The resemblance hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I pushed the thought away. Lots of people looked similar. It didn't mean anything. The girl was younger, perhaps 14, with the woman's dark hair and delicate features, but something about the way she held herself reminded me of Alina Thornton. Poised, careful, guarded. "Hello," I said, my smile faltering slightly. "You must be the guests Richard mentioned. Please come in." The woman's lips curved into a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was cultured, educated, with the faintest trace of a British accent. "You must be Sarah." The way she said my name sent a chill down my spine. Not rude, not unkind, but like she already knew everything about me. Like I was exactly what she'd expected. "Yes, I'm Sarah. Sarah Thornton." I emphasized the last name without knowing why. Some instinct for territorial marking, perhaps. "Of course you are," she said softly, and there was something in those words that made my stomach clench. I led them into the living room, offering drinks, falling back on the social training that had been drilled into me since childhood. When you don't know what to say, be a good hostess. Offer refreshments. Make small talk. Keep everyone comfortable. The boy, Marcus, I heard the girl call him, and my heart skipped because that was the name from the letter from the school in Connecticut, asked for water. The girl, Olivia, requested the same. The woman, who still hadn't introduced herself properly, asked for white wine. "We have a lovely Sancerre," I said, proud that I'd learned about wines since marrying Richard. He'd taught me to appreciate good vintages, proper pairings. Another piece of the performance I'd been giving without realizing it was a performance. "That would be perfect," the woman said. "Richard always did have excellent taste in wine." The way she said it, like she knew his preferences intimately, like she had history with his choices, made my hands shake slightly as I poured. I covered it by concentrating very hard on not spilling. That's when Alina arrived. I hadn't known she was coming. Richard hadn't mentioned it. But of course she had a key to our house, and of course she let herself in without knocking, because Alina Thornton had never believed that boundaries applied to her. She swept into the living room wearing ivory and gold, her silver hair perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate despite her 72 years. I'd always thought Alina was beautiful in that intimidating way some older women are, where age has refined them into something sharp and crystalline and hard. "Victoria," Alina said warmly, moving past me as if I were part of the furniture, going straight to the dark-haired woman and embracing her. "It's so wonderful to see you. And my darlings." She turned to the teenagers, her face softening in a way I'd never seen it soften for me. "Marcus, you've grown another inch, I swear. Olivia, that dress is beautiful on you." She kissed them both, held them, looked at them with such genuine affection that something cracked inside my chest. In 3 years of marriage, Alina had never looked at me like that, never held me like I mattered, never spoke to me with anything approaching warmth. And she'd called the woman Victoria. Victoria, the name from the phone call, the name Alina had said and then tried to take back. I stood there holding a wine glass, frozen, while Richard came down the stairs. He'd changed into a different shirt, I noticed, put on cologne. He looked good, relaxed, smiling in a way that seemed genuine for the first time in weeks. "Everyone's here," he said. "Perfect, let's sit down to dinner." He kissed his mother's cheek. He shook Marcus's hand with warmth and pulled the boy into a brief hug. He touched Olivia's shoulder affectionately. And then he turned to Victoria, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, they looked at each other with the kind of familiarity that comes from years, not minutes. "Shall we?" Richard gestured toward the dining room. I followed, last in the procession, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The seating arrangement should have told me everything. Richard took his usual place at the head of the table, but instead of leaving the seat to his right empty for me, as he always did, he guided Victoria to that chair. The chair that was supposed to be mine. Alina sat to his left. Marcus and Olivia filled in the sides. Which left me standing there, awkward and confused, until Richard glanced up as if just remembering I existed. "Sarah, sit wherever you'd like." Wherever I'd like, in my own dining room, at my own dinner party. I took a seat at the other end of the table, as far from Richard as possible, and started serving the duck with hands that had gone numb. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Alina asked Marcus about school, about his grades, about whether he was still planning to apply to Princeton. Richard's alma mater, I knew. Richard had never asked me if I'd wanted children, if we should think about their education, their future. Olivia talked about a piano recital coming up, and Alina promised to attend. Richard said he wouldn't miss it. They discussed dates and times like it was already settled, like these plans had been made long before tonight. Victoria spoke about a gallery opening she was curating. Apparently, she worked in art, something involving acquisitions for major museums. Richard asked intelligent questions, engaged fully in a way I rarely saw him engage with me anymore. Had he ever engaged with me like that, or had I just imagined it during our courtship? I ate duck that tasted like sawdust and drank wine that could have been vinegar for all I could taste it. My entire body felt numb, my mind spinning, trying to piece together what was happening. And then Alina raised her wine glass. The table fell quiet. Everyone looked at her, and I saw something in that moment that made my blood turn to ice. They all knew what was coming. Richard, Victoria, even the children. They all had this look of anticipation mixed with apprehension, like we'd reached the point in the evening they'd all been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Everyone except me. "I think," Alina began, her voice clear and strong and utterly without mercy, That it's time we stopped pretending. This charade has gone on long enough, and it's not fair to anyone involved. Particularly, and here she glanced at Victoria with something approaching sympathy, to those who have had to endure it with grace and patience. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Pretending? What was she talking about? Elinor looked directly at me, and in her eyes I saw something I'd seen before but never understood. Contempt. Pure, undiluted contempt. "Sarah," she said, like my name tasted bitter in her mouth, "I'm sure you've wondered about tonight, about why we're all here, about who these people are." She gestured to Victoria and the children with a warmth that made the contrast to how she spoke to me even more jarring. Yes, I managed to say. My voice sounded strange, far away. "Then let me clarify things for you." Elinor smiled, and it was the cruelest smile I'd ever seen. "This is Victoria Thornton, Richard's wife of 20 years. These are their children, Marcus and Olivia, Richard's son and daughter." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles going white, my breath catching in my throat. That's not possible," I whispered. "I'm Richard's wife. We've been married for 3 years." "Yes," Elinor said calmly, taking a sip of her wine. "You have been, and Richard has been married to Victoria for 20 years, concurrently." The word hung in the air like poison gas. Concurrently. I looked at Richard, my husband, the man I'd pledged my life to, the man who'd promised me forever on a yacht in the Mediterranean. "Richard, tell her she's wrong. Tell her this is some kind of sick joke." But Richard didn't meet my eyes. He stared at his plate, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on the table. "It's not a joke, Sarah," Victoria said quietly. Her voice was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you got caught up in this. I'm sorry you didn't know." "Didn't know what?" I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "Didn't know what?" "Before I continue, before I tell you how much worse this got, I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what happens next, what I discovered about my husband and his family and the web of lies I'd been living in, it's going to shock you. It shocked me to my core. And the revenge I eventually got, trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment." Elinor set down her wine glass with a delicate click against the fine china. "Sarah, sit down. Let's discuss this like civilized people." "Civilized?" My voice was rising, hysteria creeping in at the edges. "You just told me my husband has another wife, another family, and you want me to be civilized." "Yes," Elinor said simply, "because scenes are so terribly middle class, don't you think?" That comment, that casual cruelty wrapped in class snobbery, snapped something inside me. But before I could respond, Victoria spoke again. "Sarah, please sit. I know this is a shock. Believe me, I know, but there are things you need to understand." I looked at her, this woman who claimed to be Richard's real wife, and I saw something in her face that terrified me more than Elinor's contempt or Richard's silence. I saw pity, deep, genuine pity. I sat down slowly, my legs shaking too badly to keep standing. "How long have you known?" I asked Victoria. "About me?" "From the beginning," she said softly. "I've known about you since the day Richard met you." The world spun again. From the beginning. She'd known for 4 years. 4 years of my life, my marriage, my love, my trust, and she'd known it was all built on lies. "I don't understand," I said. My voice sounded small, childlike. I hated it. "How is this even possible? How can he be married to both of us? That's illegal. That's bigamy." "Technically," Elinor interjected, straightening her napkin, "only one marriage is legal. Richard and Victoria were married 20 years ago in London. It was properly registered, properly legal. Your marriage, Sarah, while it had all the trappings of legitimacy, was never actually filed with the state. The paperwork Richard showed you. The marriage certificate you think you signed, it was all theater." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "That's not possible. We had a wedding. We signed documents. There were witnesses." "You had a ceremony," Elinor corrected. "A very nice ceremony, I'll grant you. Richard hired an actor to play the officiant. The witnesses were friends of his who knew the truth, and the documents you signed were meaningless papers that went into a drawer, not to any government office. I looked at Richard, begging him silently to deny it, to tell me his mother was lying, to explain that this was all some horrible misunderstanding. He finally looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw the truth, all of it. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said quietly. "I never meant for it to go this far." "Never meant for it to go this far," I repeated, my voice breaking. "We've been married for 3 years. I gave up my job, my apartment, my independence. I restructured my entire life around you, around us, around a marriage that doesn't even exist." "It exists," Richard said, and there was actually defensiveness in his tone, like he had any right to be defensive. "Just because the paperwork isn't legal doesn't mean what we had wasn't real." "What we had," I laughed, and it sounded unhinged even to my own ears. "What we had was you coming home to me every other week like I was some kind of vacation from your real life." Victoria flinched at that, and I realized with another sick lurch that she'd been living the same pattern from the other side. 1 week with Richard, 1 week without, for 20 years. "The children," I whispered, looking at Marcus and Olivia, who were both staring at their plates, clearly uncomfortable but not surprised. "They know too." "We found out a year ago," Marcus said. His voice was deeper than I expected, more mature. "We found evidence of you. Dad had to tell us the truth." "A year ago," I repeated numbly. "A year ago, and no one thought to tell me." "I wanted to," Victoria said. "I pushed for this dinner months ago. I told Richard it wasn't fair to you, that you deserved to know the truth." Alina agreed. I stared at Alina in shock. "You agreed? You wanted me to know?" "Of course," Alina said coolly. "This arrangement was always temporary where you were concerned. You were never meant to be permanent, Sarah. You were a distraction, a phase. Richard was going through something, and you were there, willing and easy and so desperately eager to be taken care of." Each word was a knife, precisely placed to cause maximum damage. "But now," Alina continued, "now it's time to end this. Victoria has been patient, remarkably patient, but she wants her husband back full-time. The children want their father home properly. And quite frankly, the logistics of maintaining 2 households, 2 separate lives, it's becoming complicated. Richard is getting sloppy. That letter from Marcus's school, for instance, that was sent to the wrong address. We've had other close calls." "So this dinner," I said slowly, pieces clicking into place, "this isn't about introducing me to the family. This is about getting rid of me." "Such an ugly way to put it," Alina said with a dismissive wave. "This is about transitioning back to the way things should be. Richard made a mistake. An understandable mistake, perhaps. You're pretty enough and you clearly worshipped him, which I'm sure was flattering after 20 years of marriage where the novelty inevitably wears off. But the experiment is over now." I looked at Richard again. "Say something. Tell me she's wrong. Tell me you're not going along with this." He met my eyes finally, fully, and I saw the truth I'd been avoiding. He'd already made his choice. He'd made it long before tonight. "Sarah, I do care about you," he began. "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't you dare say you care about me. You don't fake marry someone you care about. You don't lie to them every single day for 3 years. You don't let them rearrange their entire existence around a fiction." "It wasn't all a fiction," he insisted. "My feelings for you were real." I caught the past tense, "were real." He had the decency to look away. Victoria spoke again, and her voice was still kind, which I was beginning to realize was almost worse than Alina's open hostility. "Sarah, I know this is devastating. I know you're in shock, but I want you to understand that I'm not doing this out of cruelty. I have children who need their father. I have a marriage that, despite its complications, I've chosen to preserve. Richard and I have built a life together over 20 years. We have history, family, intertwined finances, and futures." "And what do I have?" I asked bitterly. 3 years of memories," Alina said dismissively, "which is more than many affairs get." "This wasn't an affair," I shouted. "An affair is something you know is wrong, something you choose to participate in with full knowledge. I thought I was married. I thought I was building a life." "And now you know differently," Alina said. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? I stared at her, this cold, cruel woman who had smiled at me at my wedding, who had given me gifts, who had sat across from me at holidays, and knew the entire time that my marriage was a sham. What am I going to do? I repeated slowly. My mind was racing, shock giving way to something else, something harder. What am I going to do? Alina means, Richard said carefully, that we've prepared a settlement for you, for your time, for your understanding. We're prepared to be very generous. A settlement, I said flatly. You're going to pay me off. We're going to make sure you're taken care of, Victoria corrected gently. We're going to make sure you land on your feet. How generous, I said, and my voice was ice now, the initial shock hardening into something cold and sharp. And if I refuse, if I go to the police, report that Richard committed bigamy, even if the marriage wasn't legal, surely there's something illegal about what he did. Fraud at the very least. Alina smiled, and it was predatory. You could try, dear, but you'd find it very difficult. As I explained, your marriage was never legal, so there was no bigamy. As for fraud, well, you'd have to prove damages, and we'd counter that you lived rent-free in a multi-million-dollar home, wore expensive clothes, took expensive trips, and enjoyed a lifestyle far beyond what you could have afforded on your little event coordinator salary. We'd paint you as a gold digger who knew exactly what she was getting into and is now trying to extort money through false legal claims. I didn't know, I insisted. Can you prove that? Alina asked. Can you prove you were truly ignorant, or will it just look like convenient denial now that the arrangement is ending? I felt trapped, cornered, drowning. They'd thought of everything. Of course they had. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This had been planned, rehearsed, prepared for. The settlement, Richard said, sliding an envelope across the table toward me. It's all in there. $500,000, enough to start over comfortably. All we ask is that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and leave quietly. $500,000. 3 years of my life reduced to a payoff. I picked up the envelope with numb fingers but didn't open it. And if I don't sign? Then you leave with nothing, Alina said simply. And we make your life very difficult. Richard has lawyers, resources, connections. We can tie you up in legal proceedings for years. We can destroy your reputation. We can make sure you're unemployable in any decent position. Is that really what you want, Sarah? A protracted, ugly fight you can't win? Or would you rather take the money, sign the papers, and start fresh somewhere else? I looked around the table. At Alina, cold and triumphant. At Richard, guilty but resolute. At Victoria, sympathetic but firm. At Marcus and Olivia, teenagers who'd been dragged into their father's mess and just wanted it resolved. At my dining room table, in my home that wasn't really my home, eating dinner I'd prepared like a perfect wife in a marriage that didn't exist. I need time, I said finally. I can't make this decision right now. You have until the end of the week, Alina said. Friday, we'll need you out of the house by then regardless. Victoria and the children will be moving back in. Moving back in, because this had been their house first. Of course it had. Everything I thought was mine had belonged to Victoria first. I stood up carefully, holding onto the table for support. I need to be alone. Of course, Richard said, standing as well. I'll stay at a hotel tonight, give you space. How considerate, I said with bitter sarcasm. After 3 years of lies, you'll give me 1 night of space. I walked out of the dining room, through the house I'd decorated and lived in and loved, up the stairs to the bedroom I'd shared with a man who'd never really been my husband. I could hear them downstairs, voices murmuring, probably discussing how well or poorly I'd taken the news. I locked the bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the envelope in my hands. $500,000 to disappear quietly, to let them win, to accept that I'd been nothing more than a temporary distraction in Richard Thornton's real life. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. There was a check, already made out for $500,000. There was a non-disclosure agreement, pages and pages of legal language that basically said I could never tell anyone what Richard had done. There was a property settlement that confirmed I had no claim to the house, the cars, any of the assets I'd thought were partly mine. And there was a letter, handwritten, from Victoria. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I'm writing this because there are things I want to say to you that I couldn't say in front of Richard or Alina. First, I'm truly sorry. I know what it's like to be deceived by Richard Thornton. I know what it's like to believe in a version of him that doesn't quite exist. I know because I've lived it for 20 years. When I found out about you 3 years ago, I was devastated. I thought about divorce. I thought about exposing him, destroying him. But I had children to think about, and finances so tangled with his that separation would have been a nightmare. His mother convinced me to wait it out, that you were a phase, that he'd come back to me fully. She was right, but that doesn't make what happened to you fair. You didn't know." "I believe that. I saw your face tonight, and I know you didn't know. I wish I could have warned you years ago, but I was protecting my own interests, my own children. I'm not proud of that. The settlement they're offering you is less than you deserve, but it's more than Alina wanted to give. I fought for that amount. I made sure it would be enough to truly start over. Please take it. Don't try to fight them. The Thornton family has resources and ruthlessness you can't imagine. Alina will destroy you if you push back. Take the money, sign the papers, and build a new life. A better life. One where you're not someone's secret. You deserve that. I hope someday you can forgive me for my part in this, though I'll understand if you can't. Sincerely, Victoria." I read the letter 3 times, and by the 3rd time, tears were streaming down my face. Not gentle tears, but harsh, angry sobs that tore out of my chest and left me gasping. She knew. From the beginning, she knew, and she let it happen because she was protecting herself and her children. I couldn't even fully hate her for it. If I'd been in her position, with 20 years invested, with children to consider, would I have done anything different? But that realization didn't make it hurt less. I cried until I had no tears left, until my face was swollen and my head was pounding and my chest ached from the force of the sobs. I cried for the marriage that never was, for the future I'd imagined that would never come, for the 3 years I'd lost to a beautiful lie. And then, when the tears finally stopped, something else took their place. Anger. Pure, white-hot, clarifying anger. They thought they could pay me off. They thought $500,000 would make me disappear quietly. They thought I would just accept this, take the money, and fade away like I'd never mattered at all. Alina thought I was middle class and easy and desperately eager to be taken care of. Richard thought I was pretty enough to be a distraction, but not substantial enough to be a real threat. Even Victoria, with her kind letter and her genuine apology, thought I should just take the settlement and start over. They all thought I was someone who could be dismissed. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I dried my face, stood up, and looked at myself in the mirror. My makeup was ruined. My eyes were red and swollen, but beneath the tears I saw something I hadn't seen in 3 years. I saw myself. Not the perfect society wife I'd been playing. Not the grateful girl who'd married up and spent her days trying to be worthy of the Thornton name. But me. Sarah Mitchell, who'd built a successful career before Richard convinced me to give it up. Who'd been independent and strong before I let myself become dependent on a lie. That Sarah wouldn't have taken this quietly. That Sarah would have fought back. And that Sarah was going to destroy Richard Thornton and everyone who'd helped him build this house of lies. I didn't know how yet. I didn't have a plan. But as I stood there looking at my reflection, I made a promise to myself. They would pay for what they'd done. Not just Richard, but Alina too, for her cruelty. For thinking she could treat me like I was disposable. For looking at me with contempt while knowing the whole time that her son was a liar and a fraud. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would help me. No questions asked. "Lisa," I said when my best friend answered. "I need you. Can you come over? And on your way, can you stop somewhere and get me the name of the best divorce attorney in New York? Actually, no, not a divorce attorney, a criminal attorney, and maybe a private investigator. I need the kind of lawyer who doesn't play nice." "What happened?" Lisa's voice was sharp with concern. "Are you okay?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm not okay, but I'm going to be. I'm going to be better than okay. I'm going to be vindicated." I hung up and looked at the settlement papers spread across the bed. $500,000, a non-disclosure agreement, a quiet exit. I picked up the check and tore it in half, then in quarters, then into tiny pieces that fluttered to the floor like snow. If the Thorntons wanted a war, they were going to get one. And they had no idea who they were dealing with. Lisa arrived 40 minutes later with a bottle of wine, a box of tissues, and a fire in her eyes that matched the rage building in my chest. She took one look at my tear-stained face and the shredded checks scattered across the bedroom floor and said exactly what I needed to hear. Tell me everything, and then tell me how we're going to destroy him. We sat on the floor of my bedroom, the bedroom I'd shared with a man who was never truly mine, and I told her everything. The dinner, the revelation, Eleanor's cruelty, Victoria's apologetic letter, the settlement offer, the threat of legal retaliation if I didn't disappear quietly. Lisa listened without interrupting, her jaw getting tighter with every detail, her hands clenching and unclenching in her lap. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically see her mind working, cataloging information, formulating strategies. Lisa was a corporate lawyer for a major firm, and she had a mind like a steel trap. Okay, she said finally. First thing tomorrow, we're meeting with someone. His name is David Chen. He's a bulldog of an attorney, specializes in complex fraud cases. He's represented people against major corporations, wealthy families, people who thought they were untouchable. If anyone can find a legal angle here, it's him. Eleanor said there's no legal case, I said, hatting how defeated I sounded. She said because the marriage wasn't legal, there's no bigamy, and any fraud claim would just make me look like a gold digger. Eleanor Thornton can go straight to hell, Lisa said flatly. And she's wrong. There are multiple potential legal issues here. Fraud, absolutely. Possible identity theft if he used fake documents. Depending on how your finances were structured, there could be issues around financial exploitation. And that's just criminal. Civil court is a whole different playing field. We can sue for emotional damages, for lost wages from the career you gave up, for the years of your life he stole under false pretenses. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time since the dinner. You really think so? I know so, but Sarah, you need to understand something. If we do this, if we really go after him, it's going to get ugly. The Thorntons have money and power. They'll fight dirty. They'll try to destroy your reputation, drag you through the mud, make you wish you'd taken their settlement and disappeared. You'll need to be strong, stronger than you've ever been. I thought about Eleanor's contemptuous smile, about Richard's guilty but resolute silence, about the way they'd all sat at my table in my home, and calmly explained that I was being erased from the narrative of Richard Thornton's life. I can be strong, I said. I want to fight. Good, Lisa said with a grim smile. Then let's start gathering evidence. We spent the rest of that night going through everything I could access. I opened my laptop and started downloading bank statements, credit card records, any financial documents I could find. I photographed the settlement offer, the fake marriage certificate Richard had given me, the wedding photos, everything that proved the elaborate deception. Lisa went through the house with me, looking for anything that might be useful. We found Richard's home office locked, as always, but Lisa had a friend who was a locksmith. One phone call and a promise of a very large tip, and Tony arrived at midnight with his tools. You sure about this? He asked, looking at the expensive lock on the office door. This is quality hardware, expensive. Someone really didn't want people getting in here. I'm sure, I said. It's my house too. I have a right to know what's in there. It was a lie. It wasn't my house. It had never been my house. But Tony didn't need to know that. The lock clicked open 15 minutes later. Tony pocketed his generous cash tip, told Lisa to call him if she ever needed anything else, and left without asking questions. Good guy. Lisa and I stood in the doorway of Richard's office, and I felt like I was crossing a threshold I could never come back from. For 3 years, this room had been forbidden territory. Richard's private space, his sanctuary. I'd respected that boundary because I'd been trained to be the perfect, unquestioning wife. That wife was gone now. I flipped on the light. The office was immaculate, like everything else in Richard's life. A large mahogany desk dominated the space, with a high-end computer setup, file cabinets along one wall, built-in bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that were probably more for show than actual reading. Everything was organized, pristine, controlled. "Start with the file cabinets," Lisa said, pulling on a pair of dish gloves she'd grabbed from the kitchen. "And use these. We don't know if we'll need any of this for evidence, and we don't want to mess up fingerprints or anything." I pulled on my own pair of gloves, feeling like a criminal in my own home, and opened the first drawer. It was full of financial documents, neatly labeled and organized. Tax returns, investment statements, property deeds. I started pulling files, and Lisa began photographing each page with her phone. That's when I found the first shock. The brownstone we lived in, the house I'd thought of as our home, wasn't in Richard's name. It was in a trust. The Victoria Thornton Trust, established 15 years ago. I'd been living in Victoria's house the entire time. She owned it. She'd always owned it. "That manipulative bastard," Lisa breathed, reading over my shoulder. "He moved you into his wife's house, his actual wife's house." My hands were shaking as I pulled the next file. It was labeled properties, and inside was a portfolio that made my stomach turn. The brownstone in Brooklyn was just one of 6 properties the Thorntons owned. There was a penthouse in Manhattan, a beach house in the Hamptons, a cottage in Connecticut that I realized with a sick lurch must be where Victoria and the children lived, a ski chalet in Vermont, a villa in Tuscany, and a flat in London. Combined value, over $30 million. And not one of them was in Richard's name. They were all in trusts. The Victoria Thornton Trust, the Eleanor Thornton Trust, the Marcus and Olivia Thornton Trust. "He's been hiding his assets," Lisa said, her lawyer brain immediately understanding what I was still processing. "He's structured everything so that on paper, he doesn't own much of anything personally. It's all in family trusts that he probably manages but doesn't technically own. Classic wealth protection strategy." "Why would he need to protect his wealth?" I asked. "From what?" "From exactly this," Lisa said grimly. "From wives who might divorce him, from lawsuits, from creditors, from anyone who might try to come after his money. This is sophisticated estate planning, Sarah. The kind that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. The kind that old money families use to make sure their wealth stays in the family no matter what." I kept digging. The next file was labeled insurance, and inside I found something that made my blood run cold. Life insurance policies, on me. Richard had taken out 3 separate life insurance policies on my life over the past 3 years, totaling $5 million. And he was the sole beneficiary. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Lisa, look at this." She looked at the policies, her face going pale. "When did he take these out?" I checked the dates. One 6 months after we got married, one on our first anniversary, one last year. "And you signed these." I stared at the signature page. It was my signature, or a very good forgery. I don't remember. He used to bring me papers to sign sometimes, said they were household things, boring financial stuff. I trusted him. I just signed whatever he put in front of me. "Sarah," Lisa said carefully, her voice tight with concern, $5 million is a lot of money. And given everything we now know about Richard, the fact that he took out this much insurance on you without you really knowing about it." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. What if the plan had never been to pay me off and send me away? What if there had been another endgame? One where Richard got rid of me permanently and collected $5 million in the process. The thought made me feel sick, dizzy, terrified. Had I been in actual danger? Was I still? "We need to document all of this," Lisa said, already taking photos. "And you're not staying here tonight. Pack a bag, you're coming to my place." "But..." "No arguments. We don't know what Richard is capable of. We're not taking chances." She was right. I knew she was right. But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like letting them win. Still, I wasn't stupid. I packed a bag while Lisa continued photographing documents. We found more files, more evidence of the double life Richard had been living. Credit card statements showing charges in Connecticut on the weeks he was supposed to be on business trips. Receipts from restaurants where he'd taken Victoria for their anniversary. School tuition payments for Marcus and Olivia's private academy, $70,000 a year per child. And then I found the prenup. Richard and Victoria's prenuptial agreement, signed 20 years ago when they got married. I read through it with growing understanding of just how trapped Victoria had been, how calculated this whole situation was. The prenup was ironclad. If Victoria divorced Richard for any reason other than proven infidelity or abuse, she would get only a minimal settlement. The house would go to Alina's trust. The children's education funds would be controlled by Richard. She would essentially walk away with almost nothing after 20 years of marriage. But if she stayed married, she retained access to all the properties, all the wealth, all the lifestyle. The prenup incentivized staying no matter what, even if your husband had a second fake wife on the side. This is why she didn't leave him, I said, showing Lisa the document. She couldn't afford to, not without giving up everything, including financial security for her kids. And Alina would have fought her every step of the way, Lisa added. Look at this clause here. Alina Thornton is named as the trustee of all the family trusts. She controls the money. Richard might come from wealth, but his mother holds the purse strings. Pieces were clicking into place. This wasn't just Richard's deception. This was a family operation. Alina controlled the money. Richard played the dutiful son and managed the investments. Victoria stayed trapped in the marriage because the alternative was financial devastation. And I had been brought in as, what? A distraction? A toy? A temporary amusement for Richard during whatever midlife crisis he'd been experiencing. We kept searching. In the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, hidden under a stack of old tax returns, I found a folder labeled simply SM, my initials. Sarah Mitchell. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Inside was everything, every detail of my life before I met Richard. My employment records from the event planning company, my credit report, my college transcripts, my social media history, printed out and analyzed, my family's financial information, my previous relationship history, my friends' list with notes about their careers and influence. He'd had me investigated, thoroughly. Before we even started dating, he'd known everything about me. And there were notes in Richard's handwriting. Single, no serious attachments, family not wealthy but respectable, career-oriented but not too established to walk away. No children, claims doesn't want them, impressionable, eager to please, low risk for complications. Low risk for complications. That's what I'd been to him, a calculated choice. A woman he'd researched and selected because I fit the profile of someone who could be easily manipulated and easily discarded when he was done. I felt sick, physically sick. This wasn't a romance that had unexpectedly deepened into deception. This was premeditated from day one. He'd chosen me specifically because he thought I'd be easy to control. That sociopathic son of a bitch, Lisa hissed, reading over my shoulder. Sarah, this is evidence of fraud. Clear, documented fraud. He researched you, selected you based on vulnerability factors, and then deliberately deceived you into a fake marriage. Any judge who sees this will eviscerate him. We photographed everything. Every page, every note, every document. By the time we finished, it was almost 3 a.m, and we had hundreds of photos documenting Richard's double life and the systematic deception he'd perpetrated. I took one last look around the office, this room that had been locked to me for 3 years, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief and shock were still there, but they were being joined by something stronger: determination. Purpose, rage that was crystallizing into resolve. Richard Thornton had chosen me because he thought I was weak, easy, low risk. He was about to learn just how catastrophically wrong that assessment had been. We locked the office door behind us, though it seemed pointless now. Richard would know we'd been in there. I didn't care. Let him know. Let him worry about what I'd found. I packed more clothes, important documents, my laptop, everything I might need for an extended stay away from the brownstone. Lisa helped me load everything into her car. As we drove away from the house in the early morning darkness, I looked back at the elegant facade, the warm light glowing in the windows, the perfect picture of old money and refined living. It was all a lie, all of it. But lies could be exposed, and liars could be punished. At Lisa's apartment, I finally collapsed onto her guest bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep. My phone buzzed, a text from Richard. "Sarah, I came back to the house. You're gone. Please tell me where you are. We need to talk about this like adults. The settlement offer still stands. Don't do anything rash." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. "I'm somewhere safe, and I'm not taking your settlement. See you in court." I hit send and blocked his number. Then I blocked Aliner's number too, and Victoria's, cutting off all their access to me. Lisa appeared in the doorway with chamomile tea and a knowing look. "You okay?" "No," I said honestly, "but I will be after I destroy them." "That's my girl," Lisa said with fierce approval. "Now drink this and try to get some sleep. We're meeting David Chen at 9 a.m. and you're going to need your strength." I drank the tea, but sleep didn't come. My mind was spinning with everything I'd learned, every betrayal, every carefully constructed lie. I kept seeing Richard's face across the dinner table, his guilty expression, his weak apology. I never meant for it to go this far. But he had meant it. Every step of the way had been calculated, researched, planned. I'd been a project to him, an experiment in maintaining two separate lives. Well, his experiment was about to blow up in his face. At 8:30 the next morning, I dressed in one of my best outfits, a sharp black pantsuit I'd bought for charity board meetings. I did my makeup carefully, covering the shadows under my eyes, presenting the image of a woman in control, even though I felt like I was barely holding myself together. David Chen's office was in Midtown, in one of those sleek glass buildings that screamed expensive legal representation. His assistant greeted us warmly and brought us coffee while we waited. Everything about the office spoke of success, of power, of attorneys who won. When David Chen walked in, he wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured someone older, intimidating, loud. David was probably in his early 40s, average height, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an easy smile that immediately put me at ease. "Sarah," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Lisa has told me a bit about your situation. Before we begin, I want you to know that everything you tell me here is completely confidential, attorney-client privilege. And I want you to know that if I take your case, I don't lose. I don't believe in fighting battles I can't win. So I'm going to listen to your story, look at your evidence, and then I'll tell you honestly whether we have a case worth pursuing. Fair?" I nodded, already liking him. "Then start from the beginning," he said, pulling out a legal pad. "Tell me everything." So I did. For the second time in 12 hours, I told the whole story. Meeting Richard, the courtship, the wedding, the 3 years of marriage, the strange patterns I'd ignored, the dinner revelation, the settlement offer, the threats from Aliner, and then the evidence we'd found in Richard's office. David took notes steadily, his expression giving nothing away. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, reviewing his notes. "Okay," he said finally. "Let me see the documents you photographed." Lisa pulled out her phone and started showing him the images, the fake marriage certificate, the settlement offer, the property deeds showing everything in trusts, the file Richard had kept on me with his notes about me being low risk, the life insurance policies. David's expression changed as he reviewed each image. His jaw tightened. His eyes hardened. By the time he got to the life insurance policies, he looked genuinely angry. "This is one of the most calculated, premeditated frauds I've seen in 20 years of practice," he said. "And I've seen some doozies. This isn't a simple case of a cheating husband. This is a systematic scheme to defraud you of time, money, autonomy, and potentially, given these life insurance policies, possibly worse." "Can we sue him?" I asked. "Can we actually win?" "Sue him? Absolutely. Win? I believe so, yes. There are multiple legal theories we can pursue. Fraud in the inducement, fraud by concealment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, Civil conspiracy if we can prove Alina and others actively participated in the scheme. We can go after damages for the career you gave up, for the wages you lost, for the emotional trauma. We can argue that you were effectively defrauded out of 3 years of your life, during which you could have been building a legitimate career and relationship. What about Alina's threat? Lisa asked. She said they'd tie Sarah up in litigation for years and destroy her reputation. David smiled, and there was something sharp in it. Let them try. The Thornton family might have money, but they've made a critical mistake here. They documented everything. Richard kept files on Sarah, which proves premeditation. They structured their assets in a way that shows they were planning for exactly this kind of situation. They offered a settlement with an NDA, which implies they know they're legally vulnerable. All of this works in our favor. Hope was building in my chest, warm and bright. So we can fight them. We can fight them, David confirmed. But Sarah, I need you to be realistic about what that means. This will take time, possibly years. It will be expensive, though I work on contingency for cases like this, so you won't pay unless we win. It will be emotionally draining. The Thorntons will try to paint you as a gold digger, a liar, someone who knew what she was getting into. They'll dig into every aspect of your past looking for dirt. They'll try to break you. I don't care, I said, and I meant it. I want them to pay for what they did. Good, David said. Then here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to file a civil suit for fraud, emotional distress, and damages. We're going to ask for a substantial amount enough to hurt. Second, we're going to go to the district attorney's office and file a criminal complaint. What Richard did may constitute criminal fraud, identity theft, and potentially other crimes. I have contacts in the DA's office who will take this seriously. Alina said there's no crime because the marriage wasn't legal, I said. Alina isn't a prosecutor, David replied. And she's wrong. Using fake documents to induce someone into a relationship, taking out life insurance policies without proper consent, potential financial exploitation, these are all potentially criminal acts. At minimum, the threat of criminal prosecution will give us leverage in the civil case. What about Victoria? I asked. She knew from the beginning, is she liable too? David considered this. Possibly, if we can prove she actively participated in the deception rather than just passively knowing about it, we might be able to include her in the civil suit. But from what you've told me, she seems more like another victim of Richard's manipulation, trapped by that prenup. We might actually want to approach her as a potential witness rather than a defendant. That thought hadn't occurred to me. Victoria as an ally rather than an enemy. She wrote me a letter, I said, apologizing, saying she wished she could have warned me, encouraging me to take the settlement. Do you still have it? I pulled it out of my purse. I'd kept it, though I wasn't sure why. David read it carefully. This is good. This shows she had knowledge of the fraud. This is evidence that Richard's family knew what was happening. We can use this. We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail, every document, building the framework of the case. David asked questions I hadn't thought of. When exactly had I given up my job? What was my salary at the time? What would my earning potential have been if I'd continued working? What specific promises had Richard made that induced me to marry him and restructure my life? By the time we finished, my head was spinning, but I felt something I hadn't felt since that terrible dinner. I felt powerful, like I had agency, like I was fighting back instead of just being a victim. I'll start drafting the complaint today, David said. We'll file within the week. And Sarah, when this hits, it's going to make waves. The Thorntons are prominent in New York society. This kind of scandal, a bigamy accusation even if the second marriage wasn't legal, life insurance fraud, a mother and son conspiring to defraud an innocent woman. The press is going to eat this up. Good, I said. Let them. I'm done protecting Richard's reputation. That's what I like to hear, David said with approval. Now, one more thing. Do you have anywhere safe to stay? I'm concerned about those life insurance policies. I'm not saying Richard would actually harm you, but given everything you've discovered, I'd rather you be cautious. She's staying with me, Lisa said firmly. And I've already changed my building's security instructions. No one gets up to my apartment without me approving it first. Perfect, David said. Sarah, for the next few weeks, I want you to be careful. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. Don't accept food or drinks from anyone you don't absolutely trust. Don't get into cars with strangers. I know this sounds paranoid, but $5 million is a lot of motivation, and we don't know how desperate Richard might become when he realizes you're not backing down. The fear that had been lurking at the edges of my consciousness came roaring back. I'd been so focused on the betrayal, on the anger, that I hadn't fully processed the danger. You think he'd actually try to hurt me? I think we don't know what he's capable of, David said honestly. Better safe than sorry. Okay. I nodded, my mouth dry. As we left David's office, Lisa put her arm around my shoulders. Hey, we're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. We've got a brilliant attorney, we've got evidence, and we've got right on our side. I know, I said, but I was thinking about those life insurance policies. $5 million. Had there been a plan? Had I narrowly escaped something worse than just a broken heart? My phone buzzed. I'd unblocked it to be able to communicate with David's office. There was a voicemail from Richard. Against my better judgment, I listened to it. Sarah, please, you're making a mistake. The settlement we offered was generous, more than fair. If you try to fight this, you'll lose everything. My mother has the best lawyers in New York. They'll destroy you. They'll make you wish you'd never met me. Please, just take the money and move on. Don't make this ugly. I'm trying to protect you. If you push this, I can't control what happens. Please call me back. Please. The threat was barely veiled. I can't control what happens. Meaning his mother would come after me. Meaning their lawyers would tear me apart. Meaning I should be afraid. I should have been afraid. But all I felt was rage. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to David. More evidence of intimidation, I typed. Add it to the file. His response came back immediately. Perfect. Keep any and all communications from him or his family. Don't respond, just document. They're hanging themselves. Lisa and I went back to her apartment, where I finally allowed myself to fall apart for a few minutes. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the reality of what was coming. A legal battle against one of New York's wealthiest families. Potential danger from a man I'd thought I loved. Years of my life that I'd never get back. But as I sat on Lisa's couch, crying into a glass of wine while she ordered takeout from our favorite Thai place, I thought about Richard's notes in my file. Low risk for complications. He'd thought I'd be easy, controllable, someone who would just accept what was happening and go away quietly when dismissed. I wiped my tears and pulled out my laptop. If the Thorntons wanted to know who they were dealing with, I'd show them. I opened a new browser and started researching. Not just Richard, but the whole family. Eleanor Thornton, pillar of New York society, on the boards of a dozen charitable organizations, featured regularly in the society pages. The Thornton family, old money going back 5 generations, wealth built on banking and real estate. But old families had secrets. Old money had skeletons. And I was going to find every single one. I started with Eleanor, searching for anything that might give me leverage. Her charity work was extensive, but as I dug deeper, I found some interesting patterns. Several of the charities she chaired had been investigated for financial irregularities over the years. Nothing was ever proven, and the investigations quietly went away, but there were whispers. Questions about where donation money really went. Suggestions of self-dealing, of using charitable organizations for personal benefit. I made notes, saved links, started building a file of my own. Then I searched for Richard's business dealings. He'd always been vague about what he actually did, just saying he worked in finance and investments. But as I dug through business registries and SEC filings, I found a web of shell companies, offshore accounts, complex financial structures that seemed designed to hide assets and avoid taxes. I wasn't a forensic accountant, but I knew someone who was. Another friend from college, Marcus Chen, who worked for a firm that specialized in tracking hidden assets in divorce cases. I called him. Marcus, it's Sarah Mitchell. I need your help with something, and I need you to keep it completely confidential. Sarah, it's been forever. Of course, what's going on? I need someone who can track money trails. Complex financial structures, offshore accounts, possible tax evasion. Can you do that? There was a pause. Are you in some kind of trouble? I'm about to be in the middle of a massive legal case against some very wealthy people who think they can buy their way out of consequences. I need to know where their money really is, and if there's anything illegal about how they've structured things. Okay, Marcus said slowly. This sounds intense. Send me what you have. I'll take a look. If there's financial fraud involved, I'll find it. I sent him everything we'd photographed from Richard's office. The trust documents, the property records, the complex web of LLCs and offshore entities. While I waited for Marcus to review the documents, I kept digging into Alina. I found her social connections, her friends, her associates. And buried in an old society column from 15 years ago, I found something interesting. A mention of a scandal involving Alina's husband, Richard's father, George Thornton. He'd been accused of insider trading, a serious SEC violation. But the case had been dropped suddenly, and George had died of a heart attack 6 months later. The article was brief, just a mention in passing, but it nagged at me. I searched for more information about George Thornton's death and the insider trading case, but most of the records seemed to have been scrubbed from the easily accessible internet, which meant they were still out there, just hidden. I needed someone who could dig deeper than Google, someone who could access sealed records, old case files, information that had been deliberately buried. The private investigator David had mentioned. I called his office and asked for a referral. James Keating, David's assistant told me. He's the best in the business. Expensive, but worth every penny. Tell him David sent you. I called James Keating and explained what I needed. I'm about to go to war with the Thornton family. I need everything you can find on Alina Thornton and her late husband George. I need to know their secrets, their vulnerabilities, anything that might give me leverage. The Thorntons, James said thoughtfully. Yeah, I know the family. Old money think they're untouchable. This should be interesting. I'll need a retainer. $5,000 to start. It was money I didn't really have, but Lisa had already told me she'd cover whatever I needed for the investigation. I gave James her credit card information and authorization to start digging. By the end of that first week, I had assembled a team. David Chen, my attorney, drafting the civil complaint and preparing the criminal referral. Marcus Chen, my forensic accountant, tracking the Thornton money. James Keating, my private investigator, digging into the family's secrets. Lisa, my best friend and unpaid paralegal, keeping me sane and organized. And me, Sarah Mitchell, the woman they'd thought would be easy to discard. We were building a case. More than that, we were building an arsenal. And when we were ready, we were going to blow the Thornton family's perfect life apart. 2 months after that devastating dinner, we were ready. David had filed the civil complaint, and it was even more damaging than I'd hoped. 23 pages detailing Richard's systematic fraud, Alina's participation in the conspiracy, the fake marriage, the hidden assets, and the life insurance policies that suggested something even more sinister. The complaint asked for $15 million in damages. Not because I expected to get that much, but because David said we needed to ask for enough to make them take us seriously. The day the complaint was filed, I woke up in Lisa's guest bedroom feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Everything was about to change. There would be no going back after this. The Thorntons would know I'd refused their settlement and chosen war instead. My phone started ringing at 8 in the morning. Richard. I didn't answer. Alina. Blocked. A number I didn't recognize, I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, it was a lawyer from Alina's firm demanding I call back immediately to discuss this frivolous and defamatory filing. Frivolous? They thought they could still intimidate me. By noon, the story had leaked to the press. David had promised me it would. He had contacts at several major newspapers, and he'd made sure they got copies of the complaint. The New York Post ran with it first, their headlines screaming across the cover. Bigamy and betrayal. Society wife accuses prominent businessman of elaborate marriage fraud. The article included a photo of Richard and me from a charity gala 2 years ago, both of us smiling, looking like the perfect couple. Next to it was a photo of Richard and Victoria from some society event, looking equally perfect. The contrast was devastating and exactly what we'd wanted. The story spread like wildfire. By evening, it was on every news site, every gossip blog, every social media platform. The details were too salacious to ignore. A wealthy man maintaining 2 families, 2 separate lives for 3 years. A domineering mother who'd helped orchestrate the deception. A first wife trapped by a prenuptial agreement. A second wife who'd been systematically defrauded. Life insurance policies that raised dark questions about ultimate intentions. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friend requests on social media from reporters. Emails asking for interviews. Text messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking if the stories were true, offering support, or sometimes just fishing for gossip. Lisa helped me craft a single statement that we released through David's office. I am grateful that the truth is finally coming to light. For 3 years, I believed I was in a legitimate marriage with Richard Thornton. I gave up my career, my independence, and my future based on that belief. Learning that my entire marriage was a calculated fraud has been devastating. I am pursuing legal action not out of revenge, but because no one should be able to systematically deceive another person this way without consequences. I hope my case will help protect others from similar predatory behavior. The statement was perfect. It painted me as a victim seeking justice, not a scorned woman seeking revenge, even though the revenge aspect was absolutely part of my motivation. The public response was overwhelming. Social media erupted with support for me and outrage at Richard. The hashtag #JusticeForSarah started trending. Women came forward on Twitter and Instagram sharing their own stories of being deceived by men who'd hidden wives, families, entire other lives. The story had touched a nerve. But not everyone was on my side. The Thorntons had their defenders too. Society women who'd known Alina for decades issued statements calling me a gold digger who was obviously lying for a payout. Business associates of Richard's questioned why, if the marriage was fake, I'd stayed for 3 years without noticing. The victim blaming was predictable but still painful. "You can't let them get to you," Lisa said, physically removing my phone from my hands when she caught me reading comments for the 3rd hour straight. "The court of public opinion doesn't matter. The actual court does, and we're winning there." She was right. Within a week of filing the complaint, we received a response from the Thornton family lawyers that was exactly what David had predicted. Aggressive, threatening, and full of accusations designed to intimidate. They called the complaint defamatory. They threatened to countersue for malicious prosecution. They claimed I had knowingly entered into an arrangement with Richard and was now attempting to extort money. But they also made a new settlement offer. $2 million, double the original amount, with the same non-disclosure agreement. "They're scared," David said with satisfaction when we reviewed the offer in his office. "They wouldn't be offering more money if they thought they could win. They're trying to make this go away before discovery starts, before we can subpoena their financial records and take depositions." "I'm not taking it," I said firmly. "This isn't about the money anymore." "I know," David said, "but I had to present it to you. That's my ethical obligation. Now that you've rejected it, we move forward with discovery, and that's when things get really interesting." He was right. Discovery was devastating for the Thorntons. We subpoenaed Richard's financial records, all of them, including the offshore accounts he'd thought were hidden. Marcus, my forensic accountant, went through everything with methodical precision and found exactly what we'd hoped for. Tax evasion, unreported foreign accounts, financial structures that violated multiple banking regulations. "This isn't just civil fraud," Marcus told me, his eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. "This is criminal tax evasion. This is the kind of thing the IRS and FBI investigate. You need to turn this over to the authorities." David agreed. We sent a comprehensive report to the IRS, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the New York Attorney General's office. Within 2 weeks, federal investigators contacted David requesting a meeting. The Thorntons' perfect financial house of cards was collapsing. But it was James Keating, my private investigator, who found the information that would ultimately destroy Alina. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice tight with excitement. "Sarah, I need you to come to my office. I found something big." I met him an hour later in his cluttered office in Queens. James was a former police detective, and his office looked like something out of a crime drama. File boxes stacked everywhere, whiteboards covered in notes and connections, coffee cups in various states of emptiness scattered across every surface. "Okay," he said, pulling out a thick folder. "Remember you asked me to dig into George Thornton's death and that insider trading case?" "Yes, you said the records were sealed." "They were, officially, but I have contacts, people who owed me favors. I got access to the original case file, and Sarah, this is explosive." He spread documents across his desk. SEC investigation records, trading receipts, bank transfers, and a statement from someone named Robert Chen who'd been George Thornton's business partner 30 years ago. "George Thornton didn't just commit insider trading," James explained. "He ran an entire scheme involving multiple companies, fraudulent transactions, and embezzled funds. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars. The SEC had him dead to rights. He was going to prison, probably for decades." "But the case was dropped," I said. "Why?" James smiled grimly. "Because someone made a deal, and that someone was Alina." He showed me a memo, yellowed with age, from the lead SEC investigator. It detailed a meeting with Alina Thornton and her attorneys. She'd offered to return all the embezzled funds, pay massive fines, and provide information on other people involved in the scheme in exchange for the charges against George being dropped. "But there's more," James said. "George died 6 months after the deal was made. Official cause was a heart attack, but look at this." He pulled out a medical examiner's report that I wasn't sure how he'd obtained and probably didn't want to know. The report noted that George's death was consistent with a heart attack, but also noted unusually high levels of certain medications in his system that weren't prescribed to him. "Are you saying Alina killed her own husband?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying the circumstances are suspicious," James said carefully. "The SEC deal meant Alina kept control of the family fortune, but only if George never talked, never implicated her in the scheme, never became a liability. 6 months later, he's dead under questionable circumstances, and Alina becomes the sole controller of the Thornton wealth. She's been running everything ever since. Richard, for all his posturing, is essentially his mother's puppet. She holds the money. She makes the decisions, she controls the family." I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. "Can we prove any of this?" "Prove she killed him, probably not after 15 years, but prove she was involved in the financial crimes, that she made the deal to save herself as much as George, that she's been controlling illegally obtained and hidden wealth ever since. Yes, absolutely. And if we turn this over to federal investigators along with the current tax evasion evidence, Alina Thornton is going to have much bigger problems than your civil lawsuit." "Do it," I said. "Turn it all over. She called me middle class and easy. She looked at me like I was garbage. She orchestrated that dinner specifically to humiliate me. I want her to face consequences." James gathered all the documents, made copies for our files, and sent everything to the FBI and the Attorney General's office. 3 weeks later, on a cold morning in November, federal agents executed search warrants on all of the Thornton properties simultaneously. The Brooklyn brownstone where I'd lived, the Connecticut house where Victoria and the children stayed, Alina's penthouse in Manhattan, Richard's office. They seized computers, financial records, personal documents, everything. The press had somehow gotten wind of the raids, and by noon, footage was all over the news. Federal agents carrying boxes out of Alina Thornton's building. Richard being escorted out of his office looking pale and shaken. The headlines were brutal. "Federal investigation expands in Thornton fraud case. Decades of financial crimes uncovered in Society family." I watched the coverage from Lisa's apartment, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not just satisfaction, though there was plenty of that, but vindication. Validation that I hadn't been crazy, that the wrongness I'd sensed but couldn't name had been real and serious and criminal. My phone rang. David. "Have you seen the news?" he asked. "I'm watching it now. The U.S. Attorney's Office just called me. They want you to come in for an interview. They're considering criminal charges against Richard and Alina for fraud, tax evasion, and possibly more. Your testimony will be crucial." "When do they want to meet?" "Tomorrow. Sarah, this is it. This is everything we've been working toward. Are you ready?" I thought about that dinner, Alina's cruel smile, Richard's pathetic apologies, Victoria's pitying eyes. I thought about the 3 years of my life that had been stolen through calculated deception. I thought about the file Richard had kept on me, his notes about me being low risk for complications. "I'm ready," I said. The next day, I sat in a conference room in the U.S. Attorney's office and told my story to a team of federal prosecutors and FBI agents. They asked detailed questions, took extensive notes, cross-referenced everything I said with the documents and evidence we'd provided. "Ms. Mitchell," the lead prosecutor said when we finished, "I want you to know that your courage in coming forward has been instrumental in uncovering what appears to be decades of financial crimes by the Thornton family. We are building cases against both Richard and Alina Thornton for multiple federal offenses. Based on what we found, I expect we'll be bringing indictments within the next few months." "What about Victoria?" I asked, "and the children?" "Based on our investigation, Victoria appears to be another victim. She was kept in the dark about much of the financial fraud, and she was coerced into staying silent through that prenuptial agreement. We have no plans to charge her with anything. As for the children, they're minors and had no involvement in their father's crimes." I felt relieved about that, at least. Whatever else had happened, Marcus and Olivia were innocent kids caught in their family's dysfunction. As we built toward criminal trials, the civil case moved forward too. Depositions were scheduled, and I was both dreading and anticipating them. Richard's deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in December. I wasn't allowed in the room while David questioned him, but I waited outside, and David told me afterward that Richard had fallen apart under questioning. "He tried to maintain the smooth, confident persona at first," David said. "But when I started asking specific questions about the fake marriage, about the file he kept on you, about the life insurance policies, he started contradicting himself. He admitted to researching you before you met. He admitted the marriage ceremony was staged. He tried to claim it was all meant to be temporary, just a few months, but then he'd fallen in love with you and couldn't figure out how to tell you the truth." It was pathetic. "Did he show any actual remorse?" I asked. David shook his head. "Not really. Mostly he seemed worried about himself, about the legal consequences he's facing. He asked multiple times if there was any way to settle the case, make it all go away. I told him that ship had sailed months ago." Alina's deposition was even more dramatic. She refused to answer most questions, invoking her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination on advice of her criminal defense attorney. But her refusal to answer was almost as damaging as testimony would have been. It made her look guilty, evasive, hiding something. And the few questions she did answer, she gave with such cold disdain that David knew she'd be a terrible witness if the case ever went to trial. "Juries hate people like her," he told me. "Rich, entitled, arrogant people who think the rules don't apply to them. If she testifies, we'll destroy her on the stand." But we never got to trial. In February, 8 months after that life-changing dinner, the Thorntons' attorneys requested a settlement conference. We met in a neutral conference room, their legal team on one side of a long table, my team on the other. Richard was there, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 8 months. Alina was there, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Victoria was there too, surprisingly, with her own attorney. The lead Thornton attorney, a senior partner from one of New York's most prestigious firms, laid out their offer. $10 million, he said. $5 million to Ms. Mitchell from Richard Thornton personally, $5 million from the family trusts controlled by Alina Thornton. In exchange, Ms. Mitchell drops all civil claims, does not testify in any criminal proceedings against the family, and signs a non-disclosure agreement. No, I said before David could even respond. I'm not agreeing to refuse to testify in criminal proceedings. If federal prosecutors subpoena me, I'm testifying. I'm not protecting these people from the consequences of their crimes. The attorneys huddled, whispered, came back. $8 million, and you sign the NDA but remain free to testify if legally compelled, the attorney said. That's the absolute final offer. I looked at David. He nodded slightly, indicating he thought it was a good offer, but the decision was mine. I looked at Richard. He couldn't meet my eyes. I looked at Alina. She was glaring at me with pure hatred, and I realized that no amount of money would ever make her think she'd lost. She would always believe she'd simply paid an annoyance to go away. But I didn't need Alina to acknowledge what she'd done. I just needed her to pay for it. I want $12 million, I said. $8 million from the family trusts, $4 million from Richard personally. And I want a written apology from both Richard and Alina, admitting to the fraud and the deception. The apologies don't have to be public, but they have to be written, signed, and delivered to me. And they have to be real apologies, not legal non-apologies. Actual acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Alina's face went purple. Absolutely not. I will not apologize to this opportunistic little. Mother, Richard cut her off, his voice tired. Enough, just enough. He turned to his attorney. Give her what she wants, all of it. I'll write the apology. I'll convince my mother to do the same. Just make this end. The negotiations took another 3 hours, with attorneys arguing over specific language and terms, but eventually we had a deal. $12 million to be paid within 30 days. Written apologies to be delivered within 1 week. An NDA that prevented me from publicly discussing the settlement amount, but allowed me to tell my story otherwise. And most importantly, complete freedom to cooperate with federal authorities. We signed the settlement agreement at 5 in the evening. Richard signed his portion of the documents with shaking hands. Alina signed hers with such force I thought she might break the pen. As we gathered our things to leave, Victoria approached me. It was the first time we'd been face to face since that dinner. Sarah, she said quietly, I'm glad you fought. I'm glad you won. I wish I'd had your courage 20 years ago. What are you going to do now? I asked. I filed for divorce, she said, and there was something like freedom in her voice. Once the federal investigation revealed the extent of the financial fraud, it gave me grounds to divorce Richard and void the prenup. I'm getting a fair settlement, enough to take care of the kids and start over. We're moving to Boston, away from all of this. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it. I hope you find happiness. I hope you do too, she said. You deserve it. A week later, the apologies arrived by courier. Richard's was 3 pages, handwritten, and to my surprise, seemed genuine. He wrote about his failures, his weakness, his selfishness. He acknowledged the harm he'd caused and said he understood he didn't deserve forgiveness but hoped someday I might find peace. Alina's was 1 paragraph, typed and read like it had been written by her attorney. It admitted to errors in judgment and regrettable choices, but fell far short of real accountability. Still, she'd signed it, and that was what mattered. The $12 million hit my bank account 2 days later. I stared at the balance on my screen, unable to fully process what I was seeing. $12 million, more money than I could have earned in several lifetimes at my old career. But it wasn't about the money. It had never really been about the money. It was about making sure they couldn't just erase me, couldn't just pay me off cheaply and move on like I'd never mattered, couldn't walk away without consequences. 3 months after the settlement, federal indictments came down. Richard was charged with tax evasion, bank fraud, and wire fraud. Alina was charged with those crimes plus conspiracy and obstruction of justice related to the cover-up of her late husband's crimes. I testified before a grand jury, telling my story one more time for the record. The prosecutors told me my testimony had been crucial in establishing the pattern of fraudulent behavior. Richard eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Alina fought her charges but was ultimately convicted at trial. She received 6 years. The day Alina's sentence was announced, I was having coffee with Lisa at a cafe in Brooklyn, not far from the brownstone I'd once thought was my home. We saw the news alert on our phones simultaneously. 6 years, Lisa said. She'll be almost 80 when she gets out. I thought about Alina's face at that settlement conference, her fury at having to pay me, her refusal to see me as anything more than an annoyance. Now she was going to federal prison, her reputation destroyed, her control over the family fortune gone. "Do you feel satisfied?" Lisa asked, "now that it's really over?" I considered the question. Did I feel satisfied? Vindicated, certainly. Relieved that justice had been served. Grateful for the financial security the settlement had given me. But satisfied? That word implied an ending, a completion. And I was learning that healing from betrayal wasn't a destination you arrived at. It was a journey you stayed on. "I feel free," I said finally. "For the first time in years, maybe in my whole life, I feel completely free." And I was, free from the lies, free from the people who tried to control and diminish me, free from the version of myself who'd been so eager to be taken care of that she'd ignored every warning sign. With the settlement money, I did something I'd always dreamed of but never thought possible. I started a foundation called Second Chances, dedicated to helping women who'd been victims of financial fraud, coercive control, and relationship-based exploitation. We provided legal assistance, financial counseling, therapy resources, and emergency housing. The irony wasn't lost on me that Richard's money he'd hidden and hoarded and used to control others, was now helping women escape from men exactly like him. I also went back to school, getting an MBA with a focus on nonprofit management. I wanted to run my foundation properly, to help as many women as possible, to turn my pain into purpose. A year after the settlement, I was giving a talk at a women's shelter in Manhattan about recognizing the warning signs of financial abuse when I noticed a woman in the back row crying quietly. After the talk, she approached me. "Thank you," she said. "I've been with a man for 5 years who controls all our money, who makes me account for every dollar I spend, who convinced me to quit my job and become completely dependent on him. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was the problem. But listening to you, I realize I'm not. He is, and I need to leave." We connected her with resources that day: legal help, a safe place to stay, financial assistance. 3 months later, she sent me a photo of herself at her new apartment, starting her new job, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. "You saved my life," her note said. But she'd saved her own life. I'd just helped her see that she could. That became my mission. Not revenge, though the revenge had been satisfying. Not money, though the financial security was nice. But helping other women see their own strength, their own worth, their own ability to fight back against people who tried to diminish them. I thought about the woman I'd been 4 years ago, so eager to be swept off my feet, so ready to believe in the fairy tale. She hadn't been weak or stupid. She'd been human, wanting love and partnership and security. There was nothing wrong with wanting those things. The crime was Richard's for exploiting those wants, for researching and selecting me specifically because he thought I'd be easy to manipulate, for spending 3 years lying to my face while maintaining a whole separate family. But even his elaborate deception had ultimately failed because he'd fundamentally misunderstood who I was. He'd seen someone eager to please and assumed that meant weak. He'd seen someone in love and assumed that meant blind. He'd seen someone trusting and assumed that meant controllable. He'd been wrong on every count. I was standing in the office of my foundation 2 years after that devastating dinner, looking at our wall of success stories, photos and notes from women we'd helped, when my assistant buzzed me. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you. She says her name is Olivia Thornton." My heart skipped. Olivia, Richard's daughter. I hadn't seen her since that terrible dinner. "Send her in," I said. Olivia walked in, and I was struck by how much she'd grown. She was 16 now, poised and articulate, with her mother's grace, but something else too. Something that looked like determination. "Ms. Mitchell," she said formally. "Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would." "Of course," I said. "Please sit. How are you? How's your mother?" "We're good. We're in Boston now. Mom's happy, I think, for the first time in a long time. Marcus is doing well at school, and she paused, gathering courage. "I wanted to apologize to you." "Olivia, you have nothing to apologize for. You were a child. None of this was your fault." "I know," she said, "but I was old enough to know what was happening was wrong, and I didn't say anything. I sat at that dinner and watched my grandmother be cruel to you, and I said nothing. I felt guilty about that for 2 years." I came around the desk and sat next to her. "You were in an impossible situation. Your family, your father, your grandmother, all the adults who should have protected you were doing terrible things. You surviving that with your conscience intact is more than enough." She smiled slightly. "I'm applying to colleges now. I want to study social work. I want to help people the way you're helping people. I want to do something good with my life to make up for the harm my family caused." "Your family's sins are not your burden to carry," I said gently. "But if social work is what you want to do, I think you'll be wonderful at it." We talked for an hour, and by the time she left, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not for me, I'd found my own hope, but for the next generation. For young women like Olivia who were learning from their parents' mistakes instead of repeating them. After she left, I sat at my desk and thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the discovery, the fight, the victory, the aftermath. If someone had told me 4 years ago when I met Richard Thornton at that charity gala that he would deceive me, break me, and ultimately transform me into someone stronger than I'd ever imagined, would I have believed them? Would I have walked away before it began? I honestly didn't know. The pain had been real and deep and devastating. There were still nights when I woke up angry, when I mourned the 3 years I'd lost, when I wondered who I might have been if I'd never met him. But I also knew that I liked who I'd become. I liked the woman who'd fought back instead of accepting defeat. I liked running a foundation that made a real difference. I liked helping other women find their strength. Would I have become this person without Richard's betrayal? Maybe not. Did that make the betrayal worth it? Absolutely not. But it meant I could take something terrible and transform it into something meaningful. And that was a kind of alchemy, a kind of power that no one could take from me. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not legal documents this time, but a blog post for the Foundation's website. I wrote about my experience, not nomming Richard, but telling the story of a woman who'd been deceived and how she'd fought back. I wrote about the warning signs I'd missed, the red flags I'd rationalized away. I wrote about the importance of maintaining your independence even in a committed relationship, of keeping your career, your friends, your identity separate from your partner. I wrote about the fact that being a victim didn't make you weak, but staying a victim when you had the power to fight back did. I wrote about the satisfaction of justice, but also about the limitations of revenge. How winning in court didn't erase the pain. How watching your abuser go to prison didn't give you back the years they stole. How the real victory was in rebuilding yourself into someone stronger, someone who could help others, someone who refused to let betrayal define you. I published the post, and within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Women commented, sharing their own stories, thanking me for speaking out, asking for advice and resources. This was my real revenge, I realized. Not the settlement money, though that helped. Not Richard and Alina going to prison, though that was satisfying. But this, building something good from the ashes of something terrible, helping other women avoid or escape what I'd endured. Every woman we helped was another point against Richard's belief that people were disposable. Every success story was proof that we were stronger than the men who tried to diminish us. Every life rebuilt was a testimony to resilience. That evening, I met Lisa for dinner at our favorite restaurant, the one we'd been going to since college. Over wine and pasta, we talked about everything and nothing. The Foundation's upcoming fundraiser. Her latest case at work. A guy she'd started dating. My thoughts about maybe, someday, when I was ready, opening my heart again to the possibility of real love. "Are you scared?" Lisa asked. "Of trusting someone again?" "Terrified," I admitted. but also hopeful, because I know myself now in a way I didn't before. I know my worth. I know my strength. I know I don't need someone to take care of me. I can take care of myself. So if I do let someone in again, it'll be because I want them, not because I need them. And that makes all the difference. Look at you, Lisa said with pride in her eyes. Remember when I first met you freshman year? You were so eager to please everyone, so worried about saying the wrong thing, so desperate to fit in. I remember, I said. I was exhausting. You were young, Lisa corrected. We all were, but look at you now. You took on one of New York's most powerful families and won. You built a foundation that's changing lives. You turned your worst experience into your greatest strength. I'm so proud of you. I felt tears prick my eyes. I couldn't have done it without you. You know that, right? When I called you that night, if you hadn't believed me, hadn't helped me, hadn't given me a place to stay and loaned me money and connected me with David, I don't know what I would have done. You would have figured it out, Lisa said firmly. Because that's who you are. You're a survivor, a fighter. You always have been, you just didn't know it yet. Maybe she was right. Maybe the strength had always been there, just dormant, waiting for the right moment, the right motivation to emerge. Or maybe betrayal had forged it, tempering me like steel in a fire. Either way, I was grateful for it now. As I walked home that night through the streets of Manhattan, past the glittering lights and the rushing crowds, I thought about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. About the journey from that terrible dinner to this moment of peace. It hadn't been easy. There had been dark days when I'd wanted to give up, when the fight seemed too hard, when accepting the settlement and disappearing seemed like the easier path. There had been moments of crippling self-doubt, wondering if I was being vindictive rather than just, if I was letting anger drive me rather than principle. But I'd pushed through all of it. I'd fought when it would have been easier to surrender. I'd demanded justice when it would have been simpler to accept defeat. I'd refused to let Richard and Alina write the ending to my story. And in doing so, I discovered something profound. We are not defined by what happens to us. We're defined by how we respond to what happens to us. Richard had tried to make me a footnote in his life, a temporary distraction, a low-risk complication. Instead, I'd become the catalyst for his downfall, the reason his crimes were exposed, the force that dismantled his family's corrupt empire. Alina had tried to dismiss me as middle-class and easy, beneath her notice and her respect. Instead, I'd become the woman who sent her to federal prison, who stripped away her power and her pretensions, who proved that class and money couldn't protect you from consequences. They had underestimated me. They had assumed I would accept my role as victim and disappear quietly when dismissed. They had learned, painfully and publicly, how wrong that assumption was. And that knowledge, that certainty of my own strength and worth, was more valuable than any settlement, more satisfying than any revenge. I had fought back against people who thought they were untouchable, and I had won. But more importantly, I had found myself in the process. The perfect society wife I'd been trying to be was gone, and I didn't mourn her. In her place was someone real, someone flawed, someone strong, someone who'd been broken and put herself back together, someone who'd faced the worst and survived it. Someone who could help other women do the same. As I unlocked the door to my new apartment, the one I'd bought with the settlement money, the one that was truly mine in every sense, I smiled. Richard Thornton had thought he was inviting me to a simple dinner when he orchestrated that meeting with his first family. He'd thought he was taking control of the situation, managing the problem I'd become, disposing of me efficiently and cleanly. Instead, he'd lit a fuse he couldn't put out. And the explosion had destroyed everything he'd built, while leaving me standing in the rubble, bloodied but unbroken, ready to build something better from the ashes. That was the real revenge, not his prison sentence or his mother's downfall or the $12 million. But the fact that he'd tried to destroy me, and instead had given me the motivation to become unstoppable. He'd wanted me to be forgettable. Instead, I'd become unforgettable. He'd wanted me to disappear. Instead, I'd made him wish he'd never found me. He'd wanted me to be low risk. Instead, I'd become his worst nightmare. And as I settled into my home, my real home, the one I'd earned through fighting for myself, I realized something profound. I'd finally got my fairy tale ending. Just not the one I'd expected. Not a prince in a castle, and happily ever after. But something better. Independence, purpose, strength, and the absolute certainty that I would never again let someone else define my worth. That was a better ending than any false marriage could have given me. That was freedom. That was victory. That was revenge transformed into redemption. And it was all mine. 5 years after that devastating dinner, I found myself standing in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, the same venue where Richard and I had attended our first charity gala together, the night we met. But everything was different now. I was different now. This time, I wasn't on someone's arm, playing the role of the perfect companion. I was the guest of honor at the annual Second Chances Foundation Gala, our biggest fundraiser of the year, standing before 300 people who'd paid $1,000 a plate to support our work. The woman looking back at me from the gilded mirrors lining the walls was almost unrecognizable from the Sarah Mitchell who'd walked into this building 7 years ago. That Sarah had been eager, uncertain, hopping to make connections that might advance her modest event planning career. This Sarah wore a stunning emerald gown that I'd chosen myself, not because it would please anyone else, but because I loved the way it made me feel. Powerful, elegant, completely in control. My hair was shorter now, cut into a sleek bob that felt both professional and boldly feminine. I'd stopped dyeing away the few gray strands that had appeared after the stress of the trial. They were earned, battle scars worn with pride. My makeup was minimal but perfectly applied, and around my neck I wore a simple platinum necklace, a gift I'd bought for myself on the first anniversary of the settlement, a reminder that I could give myself everything I needed. Lisa stood beside me, radiant in navy blue, her hand resting protectively on her slightly rounded belly. She was 6 months pregnant with her first child, happily married to Daniel, the kind lawyer she'd started dating 3 years ago. A man who was nothing like Richard. Transparent, honest, devoted, and secure enough in himself that he celebrated Lisa's success rather than feeling threatened by it. "You ready for your speech?" Lisa asked, squeezing my hand. "I've given this speech 100 times," I said, "but yes, I'm ready." The truth was, I never got tired of telling my story. Not because I enjoyed reliving the pain, but because every time I shared it, someone in the audience would come up to me afterward and say, "That's happening to me right now," or "That happened to me 5 years ago and I thought I was crazy," or "My sister needs to hear this." Each telling was a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in their own deception. The MC, a popular television host who'd become a friend and advocate for the foundation, called me to the stage. As I walked up, I scanned the audience, donors, activists, survivors, supporters, and in the back corner, almost hidden, I saw a face that made my heart stop. Marcus, Richard's son. He was 21 now, a junior at Princeton, studying political science according to the occasional updates I'd received through Olivia. He caught my eye and gave a small, respectful nod. I nodded back, composing myself as I reached the microphone. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and clear. 7 years ago, I walked into this hotel as someone's accessory. I had no idea that the man I was with had researched me like a project, selected me like a product, and planned to use me like a disposable commodity. I had no idea that my entire life was about to become a carefully constructed lie. The ballroom fell completely silent. I'd learned that the key to telling this story was to start with the shock, grab their attention, make them lean in. I spent 3 years married to a man who was already married to someone else. I gave up my career, my independence, my sense of self, all for a marriage that literally didn't exist. And when I discovered the truth, I was offered money to disappear quietly, to let the people who defrauded me walk away without consequences. I paused, letting that sink in. I didn't take the money. Well, eventually I took much more money, but not on their terms. On mine, I fought back, I sued, I testified. I helped send my fake husband and his mother to federal prison. And yes, there was satisfaction in that. Justice matters, accountability matters, consequences matter. I could see people nodding, engaged with me. But the real victory wasn't the court case or the settlement or even the prison sentences. The real victory was realizing that I had the power to fight back in the first place, that I didn't have to accept being victimized, that I could transform the worst experience of my life into something meaningful. I gestured to the screens on either side of the stage, where photos began to appear. Women of all ages, all backgrounds, all with stories of financial abuse, coercive control, fraudulent relationships. These are some of the Women's Second Chances Foundation has helped over the past 5 years. We've provided legal assistance to over 1,500 women escaping financially abusive relationships. We've given emergency housing to over 800 women who had nowhere to go when they left their abusers. We've offered job training and placement to over 2,000 women rebuilding their careers after years of enforced dependency. The photos continued, and I saw several women in the audience crying, women I recognized from our programs, survivors who'd become advocates themselves. We've recovered over $40 million in hidden assets for women whose partners thought they could hide money and avoid fair settlements. We've helped prosecute over 100 cases of financial fraud and identity theft. We've partnered with law schools to provide free legal clinics. We've worked with legislators to strengthen laws around financial abuse and coercive control. The applause started, but I held up a hand. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because every single one of these women found the same strength I found. They discovered they were more powerful than the people who tried to control them. They learned they could fight back and win. And that's what this foundation is really about. Not revenge, though I understand the desire for it. Not even justice, though we fight for that too. But empowerment. Showing women that they have agency, they have value, they have the right to demand better. I took a breath, preparing for the part of the speech that was always hardest. The man who defrauded me was released from federal prison 8 months ago. He served 3.5 years of his 4-year sentence. His mother is still incarcerated and will be for another 2 years. When I heard about his release, people asked me how I felt. Was I angry that he didn't serve more time? Was I scared he might retaliate? Was I worried about seeing him again? The ballroom was so quiet, I could hear the clink of ice in glasses. The truth is, I felt nothing. Not anger, not fear, not even satisfaction. Just nothing. Because Richard Thornton is no longer relevant to my life. He took 3 years from me, yes. But I've taken those 3 years and multiplied them into 5 years of meaningful work. Thousands of women helped, millions of dollars recovered, laws changed, lives saved. The math is not in his favor. Laughter rippled through the audience, releasing the tension. He tried to make me small, forgettable, disposable. Instead, he gave me the motivation to become someone who makes a difference. So in a strange way, I'm grateful to him. Not for what he did, which was reprehensible, but for inadvertently showing me what I was capable of. I looked directly at Marcus in the back of the room. I've learned that we're not defined by our family's sins or our partner's betrayals or the terrible things that happen to us. We're defined by what we choose to do next. And I chose to fight. I chose to build. I chose to help others fight and build too. The applause was building now, but I had one more thing to say. Tonight, we've raised over $2 million for Second Chances Foundation. That money will help hundreds more women escape, rebuild, and thrive. And every single dollar is a repudiation of the idea that some people are disposable. Every woman we help is proof that we all deserve better. Every life we change is a testament to the power of refusing to accept defeat. I raised my glass. So thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting this work. And thank you for believing, like I do, that everyone deserves a second chance, including me, including you, including every woman who's ever been told she's not enough. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. People were crying, cheering, applauding. I stood there for a moment, taking it in, feeling the weight and wonder of how far I'd come. As I left the stage, I was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, donors wanting to pledge more money, survivors wanting to share their stories. I gave each person my full attention because that's what I'd learned. Everyone deserves to be seen, to be heard, to matter. It was nearly an hour before I managed to work my way to the back of the ballroom where Marcus was waiting, looking nervous and hopeful in equal measure. "Marcus," I said warmly, "I'm so glad you came." "Ms. Mitchell," he said, then corrected himself. "Sarah, I hope it's okay that I'm here. Olivia told me about the gala and I wanted to support the foundation, and I wanted to see you." "Of course it's okay," I said. "How are you? How's school?" "Good, really good. I'm actually working with a professor on a research project about white-collar crime and financial fraud, specifically about how families enable and perpetuate financial crimes across generations." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a specific interest." He smiled, but it was sad. "Yeah, well, I had a close-up view of how that works. My dad, my grandmother, the whole system they built. I want to understand it, maybe help prevent it, make sure what happened in my family doesn't keep happening in others." "That's admirable, Marcus, really admirable." "I also wanted to apologize," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know Olivia already did years ago, but I never did. I was at that dinner. I saw what my grandmother said to you, how my dad sat there and said nothing. I was 17, not a kid, old enough to know it was wrong. And I said nothing. I've regretted that for 5 years." I looked at this young man, Richard's son, who was nothing like his father, who was actively trying to be better, to break the cycle, to make amends for sins that weren't even his. "Marcus, you were put in an impossible position. Your father and grandmother created that situation, not you. You were a victim of their dysfunction, too." "Maybe," he said, "but I've learned from your example that being a victim doesn't mean you can't also make choices. I could have said something. I should have. I didn't, and I'm sorry." I pulled him into a hug. This young man who'd been caught in his family's web of lies and was trying so hard to untangle himself from it. "You're saying something now," I told him. "You're here, supporting this foundation, studying how to prevent what your family did. That matters more than anything you could have said at a dinner 5 years ago." When I pulled back, his eyes were wet. "Thank you for understanding, for not hating us." "I don't hate you or Olivia or even your mother," I said honestly. "You were all victims of the same man in different ways. The only people I truly held accountable were the ones who orchestrated the fraud, your father and grandmother, and they've faced consequences." "Dad wants to see you," Marcus said suddenly. "He's asked me several times to reach out to see if you'd be willing to meet with him. He says he wants to apologize in person properly. I told him I wouldn't ask you unless I thought you were ready, and I don't know if you are, but he's different now. Prison changed him." I felt a twist in my stomach. Richard. I hadn't seen him or spoken to him since the settlement conference 5 years ago. I'd been truthful in my speech when I said I felt nothing about his release. But the idea of seeing him face to face brought back echoes of old emotions. Not love, that had died completely, but something more complex. Curiosity, maybe, a desire for closure, or perhaps just the need to look him in the eye and confirm that he truly no longer had any power over me. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need to think about it." "Of course," Marcus said quickly. "No pressure, I just promised him I'd ask. Whatever you decide is completely your choice." We talked for a few more minutes about his studies, about Olivia, who was thriving at Cornell, studying social work as she'd planned, about Victoria, who'd remarried last year to a kind man who owned a bookstore in Boston and treated her like she deserved. After Marcus left, Lisa found me at the bar, where I was nursing a glass of champagne and processing the conversation. "You okay?" she asked, always able to read my moods. "Marcus was here. Richard wants to meet with me." Lisa's expression immediately became protective. "Absolutely not. You don't owe that man anything. Not your time, not your attention, not." "I know I don't owe him anything," I interrupted gently, "but I'm thinking about it anyway." "Why, Sarah, you've moved on. You've built this incredible life. Why reopen that wound?" "I don't think it would reopen the wound," I said slowly, thinking it through as I spoke. "I think it might be the final closure. I've spent 5 years being angry at a memory, at a ghost. Maybe seeing him now, seeing what he's become, would help me let go of even that residual anger." Lisa sighed. If you decide to do this, I'm coming with you, and we're meeting in a very public place, and you're telling David so he can advise you on what you should and shouldn't say. Deal, I agreed. That night, lying in bed in my apartment, I thought about Richard. What would he look like now? Prison-aged people, I knew that from the documentaries I'd watched. Would he be diminished, broken? Would there be any remnant of the charming man I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago? More importantly, what would I feel when I saw him? Would there be any flicker of the old attraction, the old longing? Would I feel vindicated seeing him brought low? Would I feel pity? I didn't know, and that uncertainty was part of what made me want to meet him. To test myself against that encounter and prove, once and for all, that I was completely free of him. But I wasn't ready yet, not immediately, so I let the request sit unanswered while I continued with my life. 3 months passed. The Foundation's work continued, more intense and rewarding than ever. We opened our third shelter for women escaping financial abuse. We launched a legal defense fund specifically for women fighting prenuptial agreements that were signed under coercive circumstances. We partnered with a major tech company to create an app that helped women document financial abuse and secretly build escape funds. I was busier than I'd ever been, and happier too. My days were full of purpose. I had friends, real friends, not the superficial society acquaintances from my time as Richard's wife. I had my work, which challenged and fulfilled me. I had financial security that I'd earned myself. I had independence and autonomy and the deep satisfaction of knowing I was making a difference. But there was something missing. I could admit that to myself now in the quiet moments. I was lonely. Not desperately, not in a way that made me willing to settle for less than I deserved. But the part of me that wanted partnership, intimacy, romantic love, that part was still there, dormant but not dead. I dated a few men over the past 5 years. A professor I'd met at a conference. A lawyer who worked at a different firm from David. An architect who'd volunteered to design our second shelter pro bono. Good men, kind men, honest men. But none of them had made me feel that spark, that connection that made me willing to risk vulnerability again. You're being too cautious, Lisa told me over lunch one afternoon. She was on maternity leave now, her daughter Emma 3 months old and absolutely perfect. I know Richard burned you badly, but not every man is a sociopathic liar. I know that intellectually, I said, bouncing Emma gently on my knee. But emotionally, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the hidden wife to show up, for the elaborate deception to reveal itself. That's trauma, Lisa said gently. Have you thought about going back to therapy? I had been in therapy for 2 years after the divorce, working through the betrayal, the gaslighting, the violation of trust. It had helped enormously, but I'd stopped going a year ago, feeling like I'd processed everything I needed to process. Maybe, I admitted, or maybe I just need more time. Maybe I'm not supposed to be in a relationship right now. Maybe this is my season for work and building and helping others. Maybe, Lisa agreed. But don't close yourself off completely. You deserve love, Sarah, real love, the kind that builds you up instead of tearing you down. That conversation stuck with me. Did I deserve love? Intellectually, yes. But somewhere deep inside, there was still a voice that whispered I'd been stupid to trust Richard, that I'd missed obvious red flags, that maybe I didn't have good judgment when it came to relationships. I knew that voice was lying. I knew Richard had been a sophisticated predator who deliberately targeted and manipulated me. I knew the deception had been his fault, not mine. But knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally were different things. That night, I made a decision. I called Marcus. Tell your father I'll meet with him, I said. Next Saturday, 2 p.m. at the coffee shop on the corner of Broadway and 72nd. Public, daytime, 1 hour maximum. And Marcus, I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it for me, for my own closure. So if he's expecting forgiveness or reconciliation or anything beyond me listening to what he has to say, he should know that's not going to happen. I understand, Marcus said. I'll tell him, thank you, Sarah. The week leading up to the meeting crawled by. I told Lisa, David, and my therapist, Yes, I'd made an appointment after all about the planned meeting. They all had concerns but respected my choice. Just remember, David said, you don't have to engage with anything he says. You can listen, you can leave, you can tell him to go to hell. You have all the power in this situation. That was true. I held all the power now. That knowledge was what made me willing to see him. Saturday arrived, unseasonably warm for November. I dressed carefully, not to impress Richard but to armor myself. A charcoal suit, perfectly tailored. Heels that made me tall and powerful. Hair sleek, makeup minimal. I looked like exactly what I was, a successful woman who'd moved far beyond him. Lisa had wanted to come with me, but I'd asked her to stay home with Emma. This was something I needed to do alone, though I'd told her to keep her phone close in case I needed an escape call. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, ordered a latte, and claimed a table by the window where I could see him approaching. Control the environment, David had advised. Make sure you're settled and comfortable before he arrives. At exactly 2 p.m., I saw him walking down Broadway, and for a moment, I didn't recognize him. Richard Thornton had always been a man who commanded attention. Tall, well-built, expensively dressed, exuding confidence and wealth. The man walking toward the coffee shop looked smaller somehow, even though he was the same height. He'd lost weight, not in a healthy way, but in a way that made his expensive clothes hang loose on his frame. His hair, always perfectly styled, was gray now and thinning. He moved like someone who was tired, defeated, carrying a weight that bowed his shoulders. He saw me through the window and stopped for a moment, and I saw something flash across his face. Pain, regret, maybe fear. Then he gathered himself and walked inside.